17, 14, 12, 22nd countdown.
How is it? So hello everyone and welcome to this First Steps webinar. Before we begin, please make sure you complete your online web forms before the end of the session, just so then we know it is that you have actually attended this session. We won't know otherwise. So make sure they're completed just before the end of the session. That would be lovely. What this First Steps webinar is about, it's just a brief introduction to the Steps to Wellbeing service for those of you who are currently awaiting treatment. This session is to provide you with some tools and techniques that you might find useful whilst you wait for therapy. And it also gives you a little bit of an insight into what to expect from therapy and what you can get out of it, especially for those of you who may never have had it before. Before we begin, if we do have a Q&A session open, so if you please do just let us know that you can hear us and that you can see us and that it's running clearly, that will be fantastic, just to make sure then we're not kind of speaking to ourselves. But before we begin, what we'll do is we'll just introduce ourselves. So my name is Rachel. I am a psychological wellbeing practitioner here at Dorset NHS, which basically means I'm trained to help people struggling with very common mental health problems, and I'm trained in a type of therapy called CBT. Do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yep. Hi, so my name's Julian and I work as an employment advisor. So I support people with workplace issues, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the programme.
Yes, lovely. So what we are going to cover then is brief information about our service, as well as mental health difficulties and the general population. We are also going to look at what can start mental health difficulties. So sometimes it might be one specific trigger, or it might be a gradual accumulation of lots of different things, as well as what keeps these difficulties going. So if we're aware of what keeps our mental health difficulties going, then we can tackle these in therapy and enhance our success of treatment. We'll also look at what to expect from treatment and give you a few tools and techniques that you might find useful whilst it is that you are waiting for therapy. Just wanting to double check, we've not actually received any sort of responses with the Q&A. So if you could please let us know that it is working, otherwise we're not entirely sure that we are actually live right now. So that would be lovely.
You should be able to see us, you should be able to hear us, and you should also be able to see a slide, which at the moment says session expectations.
Yes, lovely.
Well, it did.
It did, it's not anymore now. We'll just continue then until we do have that sort of confirmation, just in case it is running. So the Steps to Wellbeing service is part of a national initiative called IAPT, which is basically short for Improving Access to Psychological Therapies, which was initially rolled out about 10 or more years ago, and it was created so that everyone can receive therapy support. We offer support for anyone who is experiencing anxiety, depression, sleep issues, difficulties at work, social adjustment, stress, phobias, panic, and other mental health difficulties. Within the service, everyone is assessed and a joint treatment decision is made between you and your assessor. And this has already taken place, and you're now on a wait list to receive one of two main types of treatment. And these are CBT, which is cognitive behavioural therapy, either in a group or individually, or counselling. CBT is a more short-term and present approach, focusing on what's going on in the here and now. It aims to teach people skills to identify unhelpful and negative patterns of thinking, which is the cognitive part of it, and behaviour, so what it is that we do, which create a vicious cycle of poor mental health. In CBT, strategies and techniques are learned in order to promote change, breaking this vicious cycle and reducing negative symptoms. These can be helpful for what we are currently dealing with, but also these techniques can be thought of as life skills that we can use in the future should similar issues occur again. Counselling, on the other hand, is a more reflective approach. Again, it is a short term, so neither of our counselling or CBT options are for years and years, but it provides an opportunity for you to explore your personal difficulties and understand your current difficult situation better. This allows you to process what has happened and process the emotions involved, so then you can move forward and make provision for change so that the difficulty has less of an impact on your day-to-day life. The counselling approach is only sort of adopted for depression, not so much anxiety, though it does tackle anxiety as well. But with anxiety, a CBT approach is more sort of recommended for that. Finally, we do also offer an employment support service, which Julian, if you wouldn't mind explaining a little bit more about that.
Sure. So the team that I work with are here to support you if you've got workplace issues. So that could be anything from being in work and concerned that your mental health challenges are going to impact on the work, through to work being the cause of some of those mental health challenges. We can work with people who are both out of work at the moment and looking to get into the workplace, and those who are employed. So really, whatever the challenge, then we're here to support you through that. And the reason for having a separate team is that by trying to approach and challenge and minimise the impact of the workplace issue, it gives you more space to work with a therapist on other issues. So collectively, we're working as a team of three, to support you back to a point of robust mental well-being.
Lovely. And if you haven't already been signed up to this, and it is something which you sound, might be quite useful, just speak with that with your therapist when it is that you start treatment, and they can look at making that referral for you.
Indeed.
Lovely. So we'll take a quick look at how the healthcare system works in England with the stepped care model. How it works is that patients start off with the least intrusive step, so not to overwhelm or distress anyone. And then if this step does not work, then patients are stepped up to a higher level. So we start off at step 1, which is primary care and GPs, where some of you may have begun your journey, and where minimal symptoms of low mood and anxiety are treated. At this step, we can get better by using antidepressant medication or simply just waiting things out. However, if this help at this step doesn't work, then we are then stepped up to step 2, which is where we come into the Steps to Wellbeing service and have an assessment. From this assessment, we can receive support at step 2 level from psychological wellbeing practitioners such as myself for mild to moderate symptoms of mental health difficulties, which comes in the form of low intensity CBT therapy. Or we can be stepped up to step 3 if we require counselling, or for high intensity CBT if we have certain disorders such as PTSD, or if we have gone through step 2 and it's not worked. Also, if we go through step 2 treatment and it's not working, you may then be stepped up to step 3 in order to receive more intensive support. Outside of the Steps to Wellbeing service, we have step 4, and this is for if step 3 hasn't worked, or if there are more complex, serious mental health difficulties or high levels of risk. So, as you go through your therapy journey, if at any point you feel your treatment is not intensive enough, there are other options, and this can be discussed with your therapist. So that is how our service and mental health care in England is delivered. How common is stress, low mood and anxiety then? Actually, it's really common. It's reported that 1 in 3 people will experience mental health difficulties at least once during their life and seek further support. In actual fact, the latest statistics show that this is actually closer to 1 in 2 people, as people are now reporting more and they're seeking help more as well. So of all of the people that you come across in your life, half of them will struggle with their mental health at some point. And in England, 1 in 6 people report experiencing a common mental health problem in any given week. So that's people that are struggling right now, 1 in 6. And this is why services like Steps to Wellbeing exist, as it's actually becoming more common and more normal to suffer with a mental health issue than it is not to. What about your journey then? So we talk about improving mental health as a journey, which features many twists and turns, lots of ups and downs, a little bit like a roller coaster. However, without change, everything stays the same. We cannot stay as we are and expect things to get better for us. We have that control and that power to change things for the better. And in reality, we've already started to do that, as we've already started to take back control of our mental health, as we've already overcome the first 2 hurdles. What we need to do now is just keep going. So you have already acknowledged yourself that something isn't quite right, and you've already sought and asked for help. Every step is something to acknowledge and be proud of. We've acknowledged our symptoms, we've reached out for support, we've had an assessment and disclosed to a complete stranger what is going on for us, and we've taken the step to attend this webinar today. So acknowledge right now how far it is that you've come, and keep doing so throughout the therapy process as you go through each step towards recovery, because every step is something to be proud of. Keep patting yourself on the back, keep reflecting back on where it is that you've been.
Definitely.
So what has led to this point then? It might be due to a massive life event that has happened, so a direct cause for our mental health difficulties, such as the ones which are listed here. So relationship breakdowns, whether that's friendship or romantic, moving to a new area or a new job and the adjustment that is needed there, the thousands of things we have to do when we move house, a traumatic event. It could be something joyous, such as starting a family, but nevertheless, this can cause us stress. Physical health can also lead to mental health issues, and there is actually a high comorbidity rate between the two, as physical health has a massive impact on our daily life, therefore affecting our mental well-being as well. Stress and ill mental health can also be caused by an accumulation of lots of different things that life throws at us, not just necessarily one massive event. And we often talk about this as kind of a little bit of a stress bucket. So if you imagine we've got this stress bucket and we've got life throwing things at us, and this bucket is getting more and more full. And these little things build up and build up until it gets too much, and then one tiny thing might happen, such as the washing machine breaking down on a Saturday morning. And this then is kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, that actually this stress bucket is now to the point where it's overflowing, and that one little thing just leads it to completely topple over. We're feeling really stressed, really overwhelmed, and really, low, and that we can't cope. So why it is that we're here might be due to one massive thing, or it might be due to this sort of build up of lots of different things. What are the common symptoms then of ill mental health? So we've got a few listed here, and these are all completely normal to experience, and they may have been discussed within your assessment, as these are the symptoms which are commonly experienced by those struggling with their mental health. So feeling low or anxious, sleep difficulties, which are affected by low mood or anxiety, either because when we feel low, we don't do as much, and therefore we're not creating that need to sleep, and because of that, we're struggling to sleep. Or if our minds start racing and overthinking when we feel anxious or stressed, again, our mind's racing keeps us awake, stops us from drifting off. Our bodies are sort of awake, our mind is awake, we're then not sleeping. So stress and depression can both cause sleep difficulties. Low motivation and interest, irritability and snapping at people, tearfulness, poor concentration and struggling to focus on things, which typically is a symptom of low mood. But anxiety can also cause this, as when we feel tense, we're constantly kind of scanning for signs of threat. So that's where that anxiety comes from. We're scanning for different signs of threat. And because of that, it can lead to difficulties in concentrating, because if we're doing that all the time, our focus is going to be affected by that. Tiredness and lethargy, which again is typically a symptom of depression, but it can also be due to anxiety, as our body works overtime going through that anxious response, which drains our energy levels and our adrenaline, leaving us feeling exhausted at the end. Negative thinking, worrying excessively, changes in appetite, restlessness, and so on and so forth. We don't have to experience all of these. It might just be one or two that you can relate to, but nevertheless, help is out there to reduce the symptoms you are suffering with. So these symptoms we experience all impact on one another, and they can keep us trapped in a little bit of a vicious cycle, which we can find very overwhelming. How they are interlinked can be summarised in a common model we use in therapy, which we call the 5 areas diagram, and we're going to go through this in just a second. But the 5 areas that are in this 5 areas diagram are our situation, so what's happening external to us, so things like work or family or anything else, our thoughts, so what goes through our mind, our physical symptoms, so how our body reacts, our behaviours, so what it is that we do, what it is we don't do, and our emotions and how we feel about things. And with this 5 areas diagram, we look at 2 things in therapy. 1, what keeps our vicious cycle going, and 2, what can we do to help break this vicious cycle? So what we'll do is we'll go through a 5 areas diagram of a vicious cycle of someone who is struggling with depression. So the situation might be going down the street and they see a friend and the friend doesn't say hello. So that's the situation, that's the trigger. What then happens from there is this 5 areas sort of diagram, where these 4 different areas, our thoughts, feelings, physical symptoms and behaviours, are all being quite negative, and they're negatively impacting everything else. So if we have our situation with our friend not saying hello, this can then lead to us having thoughts of people don't like me, which can then lead to us feeling low and depressed, leading to possibly affecting our behaviours and withdrawing from others and doing activities. And because then we're withdrawing and not doing as many things, this can then lead to us feeling lethargic physically, as we're not doing as much. And how we often get energy is by doing things. So I'm sure we can all think of a time where we felt, really not had that energy, really not felt like doing something, but then we've gone and done it anyway. We've actually felt more energized and more motivated because of it. Whereas if maybe we felt that way and not gone and done something, we've actually still ended up feeling quite tired and still not wanting to do anything. So actually sometimes how we get that energy back can be by doing things. And that's something that can be, discussed in therapy. So then if we're not doing as much, we actually, we feel more tired. So then this feeling lethargic can lead to further negative thoughts, such as I'm not good enough. So if we're not doing things, we're not giving ourselves that evidence that actually we are good enough, those positive things about us. So it can lead to those thoughts of I'm not good enough or I'm useless, leading to affecting our behaviours even more. So maybe we're staying inside more and withdrawing further. Then because we're not doing much, again, we're not creating that need for sleep as our energy isn't being used up. And so we experience poor sleep. And then because we're struggling to sleep, typically happens then is that our mind goes into overdrive, doesn't it? And we start ruminating and we start having those negative thoughts, such as I am useless, which makes us feel even more depressed. We're doing even less because of that. We're struggling to sleep further, feeling even more tired, means we have difficulty concentrating from that. And then again, we're doing even less, we withdraw further, and it's creating that constant vicious cycle that's just going round and round. So withdrawing from others, and withdrawing from activities, that can lead to less enjoyment as well, and less opportunity for us to prove ourselves wrong if we're plagued with those negative thoughts, as I've just said, of I'm useless. So by withdrawing further, we're not again giving that evidence that actually we are good enough. So one of the things that we can do in therapy is encourage people to break this vicious cycle by doing more and experiencing that pleasure again. But doing this very much in kind of baby steps. So not suddenly going back to maybe where we were before or doing just lots of different things, but actually just looking at what you're currently doing and then very sort of gradually starting to do things again and getting that balance of different types of activities as well. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the second half of the webinar as well, but this is again something that can be explored in therapy. So that was a 5 areas diagram for depression, but we can also use the same diagram for anxiety as well. So we might get the thought of something bad is going to happen, which leads to us producing a surge of adrenaline to combat this perceived threat, which some of you may know as the fight or flight response. So that's an inbuilt response in us that we all have when it is that we feel that we're under threat in some way. And because of this fight or flight response, that then triggers a lot of kind of quite uncomfortable physical symptoms, such as increased heart rate, a change in temperature, feeling quite tense, changes in breathing, shaking, lots of different things. It's all caused by that fight or flight response. And with this, our behaviours then are impacted as we escape the situation, which causes that anxious response because we don't want to experience those uncomfortable physical symptoms, which leads then to that short-term relief. However, in the long term, although we get that short-term relief, it actually just keeps this vicious cycle of anxiety going. As what it does is it reinforces the belief that something bad would have happened. And we are not giving ourselves the chance to prove actually there is nothing wrong. So then we further believe this negative thought. So then the next time we experience that threat with the anxious thoughts of what if, so what if this were to happen, what if that were to happen, we experience the same physiological response and we escape again, as we've learned that by escaping we get that short-term relief. But this can then eventually lead to us avoiding these situations or these things, which can then have a massive impact on our day-to-day life. We may also do things like seek reassurance from others, which again can keep this vicious cycle going. So in therapy, one of the things that we can do is gradually face these anxious situations that we avoid, but do it without escaping. And recognising that the thing we are fearful of happening doesn't happen, and recognising that anxiety will always come down. So these physical symptoms we experience with anxiety, yes, they're uncomfortable, but they're not harmful. They're not going to kill us, and this anxiety will always, always, always reduce. Okay, that's the thing with anxiety. It might shoot up, but it will always come back down again. So, as I said, in therapy, what we do is we start to recognise what keeps our own individual vicious cycles going, and then find ways to break them and for us to feel better from this. Anything you'd like to add to that?
No.
I'll take that as a no.
I haven't at the moment. No.
So let's have a look then at the therapeutic process in more detail and what you will go through with your therapist. So a relationship should be built between you and your therapist through developing trust, allowing you to open up and offload. This can take time as you don't know your therapist, and that's fine. Your therapist will allow this into the therapeutic process. If at any point you feel your therapist is not the right one for you, which can happen, it's perfectly fine. We're human beings at the end of the day. Sometimes we just don't get on with people. Perfectly normal. Please do tell us the service, and then we can look into assigning you with another therapist. Because at the end of the day, we don't want you coming to therapy not feeling you've got that good relationship there with your therapist. These things happen, it's fine. Let us know. Hopefully then we can assign you with someone who you do have that better sort of therapeutic relationship with. During the process, there will also be an exploration of your difficulties and what has brought you to our service. And you will look at the specifics and focus on what you want out of therapy. Transformation is a key part of the therapeutic process, which involves you experimenting with positive change. Your therapist will teach you how to achieve this change, and then the expectation is on you then to try this change, such as you challenging your thoughts or testing your anxiety. Any form of talking therapy is a joint process, requiring your motivation for change and for you to be an active participant to achieving successful results. But this will be done with a therapist and done in a safe way. So sometimes we as therapists, we might push you, but we do it in order to help you and not to harm you. And if you ever do feel something is too much, because obviously we won't know that, please do just let us know and speak to us about it, and we can cater to that and scale it back a little bit so it's more comfortable for you. Reviewing change is also needed in therapy. So looking at, did that change work? And if it did, then great, fantastic, let's carry on with this. But if not, then it's fine. We can always try something else. Therapy sometimes is a little bit kind of like trial and error. We'll try one thing, and if it doesn't work, reflect upon it, try something else. And finally, there's the planned ending and evaluation, where therapy comes to a close, the process is summed up, and you review what you got from therapy, and are also taught strategies to prevent relapse, such as identifying your early warning signs. Signposting might also be beneficial at this stage to allow you to continue on your path to recovery outside of our service. So this is what to expect from the therapeutic process in general, but what about then the specific therapies? So we'll begin with CBT, which is an evidence-based approach shown to be effective for those struggling with common mental health difficulties such as low mood, anxiety, sleep issues, panic. It focuses on the relationship between our thoughts, our feelings, both physical and emotional, and our behaviours, so in that vicious cycle that we spoke about earlier. It focuses very much on the here and now, so the focus is on the present rather than 20 years ago, and it does require commitment, time and practice. Your CBT therapist will teach you techniques for you to change your life, but the responsibility is on you then to learn those techniques and then apply them to your everyday life, because in your everyday life, that's where the difficulties are. Let's give you then those strategies to help in that area. However, your therapist will support you through this process, usually seeing you every 2 weeks if it's at step 2 with a low intensity therapist, or every week if it's a higher intensity therapist. And these techniques help with a variety of issues, such as increasing motivation and routine, facing anxiety and your fears to reduce that anxiety, problem solving, promoting better sleep, and identifying and challenging negative thinking habits. So CBT is a very structured and a very focused approach. Counselling, on the other hand, is a more traditional talking therapy approach. It is time limited and an evidence-based treatment for depression, not so much for anxiety. And this is stated by NICE Guidance, which is the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, which all healthcare professionals have to abide to. And the treatments which we provide at this service have to be governed by the substantial evidence and research that has been done by them. So as such, we do not offer counselling for anxiety, as there's limited NICE evidence to suggest it's successful. Obviously, by going through counselling and talking things through and getting help for depression for counselling, your anxiety usually does get better with that. But if it is just anxiety you are struggling with, we don't recommend you having counselling for that. Counselling is an opportunity to explore issues in a safe and confidential environment, and aims to help you focus on what concerns you and helps you understand this more clearly. It respects your values, choices and lifestyle within this in a non-judgmental manner. And from this exploration of your difficulties, it then allows you to develop opportunities for change and for you to cultivate your potential. So that is CBT and counselling. But how then can we get the most from therapy? So previous clients who have been exactly where you are now have provided us with some advice based on their experiences and what they have found important or helpful to them. They agree that therapy can be life-changing, but you need to appreciate the time that it takes, as therapy is not a quick fix. We wish it was. We wish we could wave a magic wand and everything would be okay and all your issues were resolved. We really do. However, life isn't like that, and we don't have that sort of quick fix. And because it's not that quick fix, it does take time and practice. It's also helpful for you to reflect on your experiences, to stop and think about what is really going on, which you've already done by coming into our service and having that assessment, and acknowledging that you are having your difficulties. But therapy is about that too, such as reflecting on the techniques and if they're working, and if not, then just explore that with your therapist, okay? Previous clients as well, they also promote honesty, for you to be honest with yourself and also with your therapist if something isn't quite working. And not to be afraid of the truth as well, because sometimes confronting that can be a crucial part in therapy. Also, they ask for you to be kind to yourself while you're going through this. We often ask clients to, ask, what would a friend say to you? If a friend was struggling with what you were struggling with, what would you give to them? What advice would you give to them? Because often we are a lot kinder to other people, in particular our loved ones, than we are to ourselves. Yeah. But it's about maybe applying that same level of kindness that you would to a loved one to yourself. So that's quite a good sort of technique to use sometimes. It's just applying that. Especially in particular, with regards to sometimes if we are struggling maybe with depression and anxiety, that actually we do have these quite negative thoughts that we, should be okay and we should be able to cope. And it's putting a lot of pressure on ourselves. And this is what therapy can also teach us, is about maybe challenging those unhelpful thinking habits that we fall into, that actually there is no expectation that we should be okay all the time. And actually, just challenge that by being kinder to ourselves. They also promote practice as well. Because the key message at the bottom there is that with therapy, what you put in is what you get out. So you can't expect to play a guitar if you only practice 30 minutes every 2 weeks. The same time as some of you, you might get in a therapy appointment. But if you practice that guitar every day in between your sessions, you will get better and in faster time as well. So therapy does require extra work outside the sessions, and changing habits is hard. We know that, but we have the capability to change them. And small steps, they do make a difference. They add up at the end of the day. So acknowledge them as you go along and pat yourself on the back as well for doing them. So what can be done to help now? So what Julian is going to do is just have a look at some techniques that you might find useful whilst it is that you are waiting for your appointment, to help with your well-being, as well as giving you a good starting point really for when you begin therapy to help you get the most out of it.
Okay, so what we're going to look at first is some ideas around structure and exercise, diet, sleep and relaxation. These are some of the techniques that can really be useful to you. These are very general tips, so you may find that they don't all apply to you, and that's absolutely fine. And there's no right or wrong in any of these. Okay, but it might be that one or more of these techniques might be really helpful to you. It's also worth looking into the 5 steps to wellbeing, which are in the little ovals down the side of the screen. Just to get an idea of what's within those. Okay, so these are 5 steps which are heavily promoted by healthcare professionals to help improve well-being. So these are things like connecting with others, being active, learning, trying something new, and giving. And that's whether it's your time or and helping somebody do something, or giving to a charity, whatever it happens to be. That can all be really quite useful. And also about taking notice and being aware of what's going on around you, so that you are living in the moment. Okay, because it's often the case that we don't live in the moment, we live in different places. So it's just trying to come back to really being present. Yeah,
I think that is typically the case as well for people who are struggling with their mental well-being, that they do become very insular. Yeah. You pay attention, as we spoke about with that, the 5 areas model, we pay attention to what's happened to us physically. We pay more attention to our own thought processes, especially if they are, ones which are quite, critical of ourselves. We become very sort of in ourselves and paying attention to what's going on in us. We start then to pay less attention with what's going on around us. So flipping that perspective actually can be really helpful. Paying more attention to, 5 senses of what's going on around us. It's been proven to be really, really helpful.
Indeed. So just encourage you to think about whether you're doing all or some of those things. And if not, maybe contemplate trying to introduce some of those into your routines.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is structure and keeping a routine. So difficulties with a mood can impact on our daily routine and structure. So it's very easy to suddenly find that you're not going to do the things which you normally do because your motivation has dropped, because your energy or interest in doing those has slipped. So then we do less, or we start to avoid things due to feelings of anxiety, the difficulty to concentrate on what we're doing. But these are the things which actually can maintain that vicious cycle, which we spoke about earlier, if you stop doing them. So it's important to try and keep doing things and keep that structure going, even if we don't really feel like doing it. And we have to kind of give ourselves quite a lot of encouragement to do it. It is really worth putting in that effort. It's easier to stay in bed and do nothing, but the reality is that in order for us to get better, we need to start doing things, which we might find a little bit challenging, a bit difficult. But in order to get that energy and pleasure out of life again, we need to be doing things. If we don't, then what we potentially do is we stay in the same place. And you stay in that feeling of lethargy and not actually doing stuff, and that's not really where you want to be. That low mood is not going to help you move forward. Okay, so I'm sure we can all think of times when we've not really felt up to doing something. We've felt low in motivation and energy, but done it anyway and felt better for doing it. And that's one of the key things to try and just keep reflecting on. That if you make that little bit of effort, if you actually do engage with doing something which you've stopped doing, then you will start to gain some benefits from doing that. So use that experience to help motivate you and help you to do more. Okay, so this may be your first step on that journey to recovery. It might not resolve all of your mental health difficulties, but it can help to start to lift your mood, and that's a really important first step.
Yeah, okay. I think in particular it is about just those kind of small baby steps. And you know, might think, oh, I'm going to plan to go to a gym class every night or something like that to get that routine there. And actually, maybe if you haven't been doing any of that for quite a long period of time, suddenly going to a gym class every single night of the weekday actually is a mammoth task to do. So it's about taking that into account, and actually maybe if it is just planning, you know, going for a 5-minute walk one evening, that's something that's about us, you know, having that little bit of a structure there. You know, and in particular when it comes to the employment support team as well, I'm sure, you know, keeping a routine with work, that is something that is really sort of helpful. Yeah,
absolutely. Work is a big routine creator, because you have to be up in the morning. You have to get yourself dressed to go to work. You're having to do activities at work, and then when you come home, because you've got less time, you tend to be more organised and actually doing things in the evening. So if you're currently away from work, it's very easy to start to lose that structure. If you're not working at the moment, once again, it's difficult to have that structure. If you've got children or partner, then that can help create structure, because you need to get the kids up, get them off to school, etc. If you've got pets, particularly things like dogs, they create structure, because they will require you to take them out 2 or 3 times a day. So that creates that bit of structure. So finding a way to bring structure back into your life or keep it in your life is really, really beneficial to you. Okay. So we're going to talk about exercise. Let's call it activity, because it doesn't have to be exercise.
Exercise sometimes strikes fear in people that they've suddenly got to, like say, go to a gym class or go for a run. And actually that's not what we mean by that. Like you say, it is more activity.
So research suggests that exercise or activity really improves mental health. I'm going to use both of those words because they'll probably resonate with each one of you. So it does encourage activity, which, as we said, does help with our well-being. It gets us outside. It raises things like your serotonin levels because you're doing activity, and serotonin gets released by your brain. That's what we might otherwise call the happy hormone, as endorphins, which come out as well. So those are the kind of things that really start to give you a feel-good factor when you're doing activity.
Yeah, some of you might actually be taking a certain type of antidepressants, which are called SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And how they work is basically by blocking signals in our brain. And by doing that, it allows this sort of increase in serotonin. And these are, you know, the typical sort of antidepressants which some of you may be on, such as citalopram or sertraline. And as I said, they work by getting us to create more serotonin. But as we've just said, just by doing exercise/activity, actually we can get just those same amounts. And actually, you know, research has shown that doing 30 minutes of moderate exercise, such as brisk walking, 5 times a week is just as effective as a course of antidepressant medication.
So regular exercise activity also reduces stress through the endorphins produced, which helps the hormone cortisol, which is created in the fight or flight response when we feel anxious or anxiety or stress. So it helps to reduce that. And it also, as well as reducing fatigue and overall levels of tension, you can also improve your alertness, your concentration. It will potentially have a positive impact on your sleep and your self-esteem, as well as helping us to manage any worries that we have about our health. So when doing exercise or activity, we talk about moderate is fine. So ideally 30 minutes most days. But what do we mean by moderate? Because that's a very vague
It's bandied
word.
about a lot, isn't it? And everyone's
It
like,
is.
what does moderate actually mean?
Indeed. So moderate is activity which still allows you to hold a conversation with another person, but it is also going to raise your heart rate. So it will depend on your own individual fitness levels, where you're starting from, and you will find over time that the amount of activity exercise that you can do will increase as your fitness levels start to change. Okay.
But that in itself is helping improve with that self-esteem. It's creating a little bit of a structure as well, because if you are doing a little bit more, then obviously you've got that structure there, you've got that routine, you're doing it a bit more.
Definitely.
So obviously it's helping in terms of the routine, but also in terms of exercise as well. And obviously exercise / activity, it can be anything.
It can.
So often, like I said, people typically think of, going to a gym class, joining a running club, going boxing, whatever it is. But it could be something like, doing vigorous cleaning or something like that. It could be going for a walk, whatever it is, as long as it gets the heart racing, it's counted as exercise and activity. And it's important as well, when it is that you are doing this, to do something which you enjoy doing.
Indeed.
So if you absolutely hate running, don't go for a run 30 minutes 5 times a week. You're not going to get any enjoyment out of that. Do something which you enjoy doing. It might be that you do join a club, in which case then you get in that social side of things and you're connecting with other people. But it's important, when you are doing this exercise, doing this activity, doing something which you enjoy on top of that, because that's only going to help improve things and reverse that vicious cycle.
And I think you picked up on a really important thing. If you can do something with other people, that can be absolutely fantastic. It takes some of the boredom out of doing activity.
Of course,
it gives you opportunity to engage with other people. And I'm going to do a little plug here. Some of you may have come across things like park runs. Happen every Saturday morning, 9 o'clock. They happen in Bournemouth Ham Pool. Now, they can be really fantastic. They actually do have an association with mental health charities, because of the recognition that parkrun creates a really beneficial environment for people. So it's all free, doesn't cost you anything, it's all run by volunteers. So if you're not at a point where you can do lots of activity, then there's an opportunity to volunteer and help other people engage in the parkrun. There's the opportunity then to start working on parkrun, and actually a lot of people walk around parkrun.
Oh, definitely.
So if you're not a runner but you enjoy walking, that can be an opportunity. And if you feel like you want to take on a bit of a challenge, then there's an opportunity to work from, and there's another bit of plug here, Couch to 5K, which you will find lots of apps for. So it can be a really useful way to engage with people, engage in doing a bit of giving, a bit of activity, a bit of social activity. Comes together really nicely.
And you can also as well go to your GP, because I know gym memberships are very expensive, and who can afford that? But there is, if you go to your GP and talk about this, actually they can then give you sort of a prescription, exercise prescription or something like that, where actually you get discounted gym membership. So again, that's something as well. But there's lots of different things you can do, and as I say, it's just about finding what it is that you find enjoyable.
Indeed. Okay, so let's have a look at diets. So diet, next tip. There's a strong correlation between having a healthy, balanced diet and good mental health. So it is important that we eat regularly, so same time every day, and to have that balance in the foods that we eat. So if we're feeling low or anxious, we're more tempted to eat poorly. So we're often tempted to feed into a vicious cycle of eating poorly and eating irregularly. Okay, so for example, when we feel stressed, our body uses up the energy resources in our system quite quickly, and as a result, our blood sugar levels are dropping. So due to this, we tend to look for a quick fix, and that's usually in the form of chocolate. And I can tell you, in our office, that's quite a common one. Or things like crisps. Okay, and we then get that bit of a sugar spike.
I'm sure you can all relate to this as well, that we do get that sugar spike, don't we?
Indeed.
But then not long after that, we get that sugar crash.
Indeed, yes.
And then we only look for that quick fix again.
Indeed. And then you're into that poorer cycle of food and what you're actually eating. So having that balanced diet with foods which release sugars more slowly, such as things like fruit, vegetables, nuts, oats, can help when we're feeling stressed due to that. So some foods have been linked to good well-being. So things like bananas and drinking plenty of water as well, which is really good for you. So other foods and drinks have been negatively linked to good well-being, such as alcohol and caffeine. So alcohol is a depressant, and it also acts on the ability of your antidepressant medication to work fully.
Yeah, so it blocks out any sort of benefit that they're having.
So alcohol also impacts on your sleep quality. So the concern is that if you're having alcohol, that you don't get that deep restorative sleep, and that makes us feel more tired the next day, and that then adds into that stress, feeding into that vicious cycle. So caffeine, a bit of a stimulant. So when we're feeling anxious and stressed, if you then add more caffeine in, you're ramping up that situation. Okay, so ideal, if you can think about
All about reducing, isn't it? Because often people do ask that, especially when it comes to sort of alcohol. People do ask, well, how much is too much? How much is going to impact on my sleep? How much is it going to? And it is very much down to sort of the individual. We can't sort of prescribe, oh, you should only drink a certain amount, and that's going to have an impact on your sleep. That's going to have an impact on your medication. Actually, it's very much down to the individual. So if it is that maybe you've had a couple of drinks, you wake up the next day and you feel really groggy, you feel really stressed, you don't feel refreshed at all. 2 drinks the night before actually does have a massive impact on your sleep. Someone else might drink that exact same amount, wake up the next day, and they have been able to go into that deep restorative sleep, and they do wake up feeling refreshed. It's just about knowing yourself and knowing how much is too much when it comes to caffeine, when it comes to alcohol. So I know for me, caffeine does have a massive impact on my anxiety levels, has a massive impact on my ability to sleep. So I know for me, through that trial and error, if I have caffeine after 12 o'clock midday, I'm not sleeping at night. And I know that through trialing that out. So it's exactly the same thing. We can't give a sort of a guidance of how much you should be drinking in terms of alcohol or caffeine or whatever it is, because it is a lot of it down to the individual.
Indeed. So to see what you can do in terms of minimizing your intake, because that will start to have a positive impact on you. Okay, let's have a little look at sleep. So another area which is related to mental health difficulties. And so if we can look at improving sleep, then it can help us feel much better. So we do go through a number of sleep cycles during the night, but if we wake up, these can be disturbed and we may not feel fully rested. Sleep is about the individual. So there's no fixed amount of sleep that we need, and it does very much depend and change on age and activity levels. So it's often the case that we need less sleep as we get older in age, so kind of over 65, and we need more sleep with more activity. Sorry, I've said that wrong. Yes, we do. We need more sleep if we've got more activity going on in our lives, because sleep is a period when your body goes into a restorative place. It goes into repair. Okay, so it's like popping your car over an MOT and a service. When it's in there, it comes out feeling much better. So it's the same with us. Okay, so if you're struggling with sleep, it might be down to low activity levels, so you're not creating the need to sleep. So a tip might be to increase the amount that you're doing, so increase that activity levels during the day, both physically and mentally, to create the need for sleep at night. So 7 to 8 hours is recommended for adults between 18 and 65, but what is most important is that we prioritize the first 4 hours of sleep. As during this time, we go through 2 cycles of the 5 stages of sleep, and our body is fully restored physically within this time. The rest of our sleep is about time for our brain to process activities and things that have gone on during the course of the day, organize information into your long-term memory. So it's important from that benefit, but our body can function without that second part of the sleep. Though we may feel a bit groggy, okay, and we may not be performing at our best, but you will survive. Okay, so with sleep, it's more about the quality of the sleep than the amount of sleep. So our sleep can be disturbed by anxious thoughts, which keep us awake, stop us from initially dropping off, or they wake us up in the middle of the night and then prevent us from going back to sleep after that point. So a good idea might be to keep pen and paper by your bed so that you can take the opportunity to note down those worries and thoughts so that you can deal with them in the morning. So it's often said if you can write it down, it's out of your mind, it's on a bit of paper, you're not going to forget about it, but it might then help you to get back into sleep. So think about the caffeine, the alcohol and drugs which can negatively impact on sleep, either by stimulating us to keep us awake or by preventing us from falling into the deep restorative sleep stage that our bodies are really looking for that repair process. Okay, so good sleep habits. Try and avoid clock watching because that really doesn't help. Okay, so if you can, keep your phone away from your bed. If you've got a clock, see if you can find something that dims a clock that dims the color when the lights go out, so it's not quite so apparent. If you can't do that, then perhaps put a piece of cloth or something over the top so that it's not apparent in your life all the time. Okay. If you do need to keep your phone by your bed because it's your alarm, turn it over so that the screen's down.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you think about turning off things like the notification sound?
Yes,
because that really won't help.
Yeah.
Okay, so try and avoid those thoughts that if I go to sleep now, I'll get 6 hours.
Yeah.
Because that's not really going to help in terms of your sleep cycle.
We constantly get those thoughts, don't we? Well, if I go to
Yeah.
sleep now, I'll get 6 hours sleep.
Yeah.
And then some period of time later, we'll go, well, if I go to sleep now, I get 5 hours sleep. It's just leading to that increased anxiety. We're worrying about things. We're worrying, will I be able to function the next day on this amount of sleep?
Yeah.
And it keeps us awake, stops us from sleeping. And what I'd also recommend with that as well is actually, if you do have a phone or an alarm, your alarm is your phone or whatever it is that you use to wake you up, keep it at the other side of the room. Because if you, like me, have a particular problem with pressing the snooze button, if your snooze button, the ability to do that is on the other side of the room, you then physically have to get up in order to turn that alarm, that annoying noise off. By doing that, you're then awake, aren't you? Because you've got out of bed, you've had to, think and engage with your thoughts, and then we're not so tempted to fall back to sleep. So that is another quite a good tip as well. So
try and avoid engaging with anything that's going to stimulate you. So things like your phone, your laptops, your tablets, try and keep those out of the room. Our mind is then awake if you're engaging with those, and that will make it harder to switch off and relax. And that's what you really need for good sleep. So these devices also typically emit a blue light, and that blue light mimics natural daylight, and that natural daylight tends to try and wake your brain up and keep you active. So it's tricking your brain into thinking it's daytime when actually your need is to be asleep.
And that then is not producing actually the sleep hormones that we need for sleep, because those sleep hormones are produced when it is that there's light. So if we're not sort of having those sleep hormones because of the light, we're not then really sort of being able to fall asleep.
Indeed. So you can get filters for those devices. So you might have a night setting on your electronic device. So that can be helpful. However, you're still engaging in the activity. And that's the thing that can wake your brain up and keep you active. So just be mindful of that. If you can minimize that stimulation, you will help yourself in sleep. So writing down anxious thoughts and worries, as we said earlier, can really help because nothing gets resolved at 3 a.m. in the morning. So write those thoughts down so that you can deal with them at a later point. And once they're out of your mind, hopefully that then allows you to clear your mind and also sleep.
Yeah.
We also sometimes worry about forgetting things. Which can keep us awake. So the same thing applies. Writing that down means that you won't forget it. Okay. If you struggle to get off to sleep, after about 20 minutes, and we're not asking you to clock watch here, but just be kind of mindful. I've been in this state for a little while. Think about getting up and going somewhere else that's a little bit still quiet and dark. Maybe invest in a very low level night light, so the kind of thing that your children have, etc. And do something that's not mentally stimulating. So that might be just a bit of mindfulness, might be a bit of colouring, might be an easy jigsaw, anything that's not really going to stimulate you too much.
Read the other pages.
That could be, that'll probably work very well.
Yeah.
And then try and go back to bed when you start to feel sleepy again. Because what you're trying to do is to create a correlation that when you're in bed, you're asleep. What you want to try and minimize is a correlation that you can be in bed and wide awake, because that's the wrong correlation that you want. Things like relaxation techniques can be really beneficial in terms of helping to reduce that physical unrest, whether it's some meditation, mindfulness, gentle stretching, having a bath, or some of the relaxation techniques we're going to talk about in a moment. So things that can calm your mind and your body down will help to promote sleep. And if we think about BERT, so this is about relaxing your body, having a positive environment for sleep with light, noise and temperature, etc. Having a good bedtime routine, and then think about that 20-minute rule that we've just talked about. So not staying in bed when you're awake, but getting up, going away, and then come back and try again.
Yeah. And with regards to it, to Bert, about our environment, is looking at things like, it could be something really, quite simple actually that's stopping you from sleeping. So it might be, is your room dark enough? Is it the right temperature? Is there some kind of noise or vibrations going on that's stopping you from sleeping? Is it your partner snoring maybe? And looking at kind of, problem solving sort of them, troubleshooting that. And there is a massive actually, correlation between having that good bedtime routine and then having good sleep. Because if we sort of start to build a bit of a bedtime routine, we start to get a little bit of association there between the activities that are involved in that routine and us feeling sleepy and being better off sort of going to sleep. So we often sort of ask people to come up with sort of a bedtime routine which involves 3 things. So as we start then to do those 3 things, our brain then starts to associate those activities with bedtime. So as we start maybe to do, the first thing, our brain recognizes, oh, this is part of my bedtime routine. And as we go into that second and third thing, our brain is like, yep, this is definitely my bedtime routine. It's time now to switch off. So it could be something like reading your kids a bedtime story, you know, brushing your teeth, and then doing some gentle stretching in bed. As you start to do those things, your brain recognizes it's part of it's time for bed, basically, helps you to unwind, then switch off, and it then helps you then to fall asleep. Indeed. So that might be a good thing to sort of try.
Yeah. Okay, so the next tip we're going to talk about, so the last one is relaxation. So relaxation is a skill. We're not used to having time to relax. We live in this kind of fast-paced world now, but it can have a massive positive impact on our well-being. As it's a bit of a skill, it does take time and effort to learn, to practice and develop and become comfortable with it. But if you can find a relaxation technique that works for you, then it can go a long way to improving your mental well-being. Okay, so relaxation is good for all mental health issues, but particularly for the anxious physical symptoms that we experience, as relaxation can help reverse the fight or flight response we experience when we perceive threat or feel anxious. One common technique is to relax our breathing, just by noticing it and concentrating on breathing calmly. You might want to use a technique which involves you counting alongside your breathing, as this can help to distract your thoughts and worries, as well as physically relax you. An example of this might be what we call square breathing, where you breathe in for a count of 3, hold that breath for a count of 3, breathe out for a count of 3, and hold that for a count of 3. And you're just following that cycle.
Yeah. Some people actually find quite helpful with that is actually sort of picturing a sort of a square. So 3, 3, 3, 3. That can also help kind of distract our mind away as well.
Another one is what we call the 7-11 breathing technique, where you're breathing in for a count of 7 and then breathing out for a count of 11. So the count in and the count out want to be at the same pace. But
and it's not seconds as well.
It can be as fast or as slow as you like it, and that will vary depending on the individual.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you find that too much, what we'd recommend rather than 7 and 11, it might be 5 and 9 or 3 and 7. Indeed. But as long as we're sort of having it with those odd numbers, because odd numbers require a little bit more concentration when it is that we're counting up to them, and as long as we're having it those kind of equal distance apart, because when we sort of breathe in while we're panicking and feeling overwhelmed, we've got those sharp intakes of breathing. So we breathe like that, we're not really breathing out. So if then our breathe in is shorter than our breathe out, we're then sort of balancing out that kind of the levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide in our system, which is why we ask you to breathe in for less than breathing out. So as long as you've got those sort of things in place, like I said, if 7 and 11 is too much for you, 5 and 9, 3 and 7, perfectly fine. Indeed.
So one of the things that you will notice if you practice those is that you will feel yourself get calmer. And it doesn't take long for that to happen. So you might find yourself feeling calmer in as little as half a dozen cycles of breathing like that.
Yeah.
So one of those things to practice, the more you practice any of these techniques, the easier they work for you. So another thing to consider is what we call progressive muscle relaxation, or PMR. So this is a really useful relaxation technique where we gradually relax different muscle groups by tensing them first and then releasing them in stages. So this is good for the muscle tension we sometimes experience with stress, as well as keeping our mind distracted by going through different body parts.
Yeah. There's different ways to do it, isn't there?
There are.
And what I always tend to recommend is sort of tensing up. Say, for example, if you were to get your fist now, tense that up for about 5 to 7 seconds and then just let it go. You'll then notice actually there's a big difference then between feeling tense and relaxed, and actually your hand is a lot more relaxed from that. And it's then about just maybe going through different body parts and working your way from there.
So some people do find PMR really useful for falling asleep.
Yes.
And if you start at one end of your body, so with your feet, for instance, and then slowly work your way up, you may find that you're actually asleep before you finish.
Yeah.
I have heard
you can't
people
quite
say
remember getting to your head because you've fallen asleep beforehand, definitely.
But you might start the other way and work from head down. Okay. So another opportunity to explore is mindfulness, where we're looking to focus more on the present moment. And there are lots of ways to practice mindfulness, so it's worth doing a little bit of research on the internet, not late in the evening, and trying to find different techniques to see what works for you. A simple one is what we call the 5 senses game, where you focus on 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and then one good thing about yourself. It allows us to ground ourselves in the present moment rather than ruminate about the past or worry about the future. So there are lots of different relaxation techniques out there. So it is doing a little bit of investigation, a little bit of exploration to find something that works for you. It is highly recommended, and in order to work at its fullest potential, you need to dedicate a little bit of time to it and practice those techniques. If you try it once, there's a strong possibility that you won't feel any benefit from it. If you try it twice, you'll start to feel something. If you try it 3 or 4 times, you might then start to find that actually you're feeling some really positive benefits from doing that. If you still haven't got anything up to that point in time, then it might be that for you is not the right one. Yep. So have a look and try something different.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, so do think about making that part of your day. Think about popping into your structure. Even if it's just 10 minutes, it will start to help you to relax. Okay, so in general, we need to prioritise our well-being and give it more importance. It might be that we've got to take a bit of time out now in order to learn the techniques and work on ourselves. However, in the long run, this will be really beneficial, and we can use these techniques to maintain positive mental health rather than us struggling if we didn't work on these things. Life can be busy, but it's worthwhile dedicating a bit of time for us and focusing on ourselves. You are important. Your health is important. It's also worth noting that it's not your fault that you feel the way you are at the moment. As discussed earlier, nearly 50% of us will struggle with mental health difficulties at some point. If we were to injure ourselves physically, say we fell over and broke a leg, we wouldn't blame ourselves. Likewise, things happen, and it's not our fault that psychologically we're struggling. But we can do something about it. We can get better, and we are in control of this, which is scary, but at the same time, it's quite liberating that we have the power to change where we are. And it's these small changes which can start to make a significant difference. So before you start therapy, have a think about what you want to change in your life and what you want out of the treatment that you're going to engage with. Only you know the answer to that. And if we as therapists know it too, then we can steer you on the right path towards achieving that. Okay, so that's the end of this webinar. I hope you found it useful and that there's something within it that you can relate to that engages you.
Yep, so yeah, there's further resources that you can see on the screen. So this is for in Dorset. So obviously there's the Steps to Wellbeing website, there's the employment service, the wonderful employment service, and the self-help website as well, so getselfhelp.co.uk. That is actually a really, really good website. There's a lot of information on there. There's a lot of sort of techniques and therapy tools that you can start using now. So I highly recommend going on that. There's the My Health My Way website as well. And they're a fantastic free organisation under the NHS who provide support for people struggling with physical health conditions. So that might be a good option for you if you do have those physical health problems as well. There's the Books on Prescription scheme. There's the fabulous Recovery Education Centre who provide lots of free courses in Dorset and the Bournemouth area. So have a look at that website. There might be a course there that actually you quite fancy. Feel free then to sign up to that. There's Add Action as well for people who are struggling with drug and alcohol issues, the support there. And if you are feeling that you are in a crisis, in case of emergency, if you're having quite suicidal thoughts and you feel that you need that extra support, go to your GP, book an emergency same-day appointment. You can ring 111, tell them you're in distress. There's also the number for Samaritans as well, which is 116 123. And that is just in general, if you do ever need someone to talk to and someone to offload to, that's what they're there for, so use them at any time. There's also ringing 999, going to A&E, and then there's a crisis number that's provided there as well, for if you do feel that you might act upon these thoughts. And it's a very similar story for Southampton as well, so we've not forgotten about you guys. The Steps to Wellbeing service, the employment team, self-help website, Books on Prescription, and the same crisis numbers as well. So what we've covered, we've gone through brief information about our service, mental health difficulties and the general population, so how common it is, what can start mental health difficulties, whether it's one thing or a gradual accumulation of lots of things, what keeps these difficulties going, so talking about that vicious cycle, what to expect from treatment, and then have how to look after yourself whilst you're waiting for treatment, which Julian did wonderfully there. Remember, as Julian said, you are important. Do give yourself time in order for things to work, and give yourself time to look after yourself. Be kind to yourself. Remember that small steps do make a difference, so keep acknowledging them throughout your journey. And then ask yourself, what 1 or 2 things would you do for yourself now from today's session? Thank you very much for attending tonight. Good luck with your treatment and the journey ahead, and we wish you all the best.
And can I just say, as a final note, we have been going through this presentation, and we're very mindful that we've not had one response on our Q&A. So it's a possibility that actually nobody has listened to us, because for some reason nobody's been able to see us.
Yes.
So that might be a technical difficulty that we are unaware of. So have we got the opportunity to allow people to see the
so if that is the case, because we're very much aware, technical issues is just not our forte. If it is that people haven't had access to this webinar, we will send it out in email after the session later on in the week. We'll get to the bottom basically of what's been the issue. If it is, it's just the Q&A that's not been working and you have been typing questions, we do apologise. We just don't have access to them. So we're not ignoring you. It's just that we don't have access to it, so we can't respond. So it's either one of two issues. Either it's just not worked, in which case we'll send this webinar out to you in an email, or it is that it has worked and we just don't have access to the Q&A and that's not working. So we do apologise for those of you who have been typing things. Unfortunately, we won't be able to respond to them, so I do apologise for that.
So this could be a bit like watching us on Dave.
Yes, pretty much. Yeah. Oh no, but thank you very much. Indeed. Do look after yourself and good luck with the treatment ahead. Bye.
Take care all.